As always, I like to start with a drawing before I get going. In our last drawing, we had the end of the arm made, but now we're going to add a couple more syringes and we're going to add the base to it. So here's where we were last day, and we had the linkage mechanism working. And now we're going to create a new part. We're going to call that the boom, or a new component, I should say. And the boom is going to come in and it's going to connect on there. So I choose the plane based on the part that we had before. And I start out just like I did the last one with a couple of construction lines. And I'm going to use the construction lines to locate the various parts on the boom right here. And here we go. We're just putting in. Now, the reason I know where to put those is because of the sketch that I put out beforehand. And I have no idea what the exact dimensions are going to be on any of this. We're going to play with that later on, but that's why we're using parametric design. Okay, we come along and we put some circles in here. We're going to shrink the circles down to the hole diameter in just a moment here, and there we go. It's the same parameter that we used in the previous drawings. And there we go. Those are all down to size. And now I'm going to put some outside circles around them. Again, just like we did in the last one, but this time around we're going to try something a little different. And after I put some dimensions on here, we're going to come back and we're going to join them all with tangent lines to form a more visible body right on here, just to make it a little easier to see what we're doing. So I'm just adjusting and tweaking some of the positions right here, and there we go. And I'm applying tangent constraints. Now, one of the things I'm being very careful to do when I apply that is to not implicitly apply any other constraints by where I click on the circle. You sometimes have to go back and take a look at your constraints, and if it's not letting you get nice tangent lines in there, just put it off in outer space somewhere and then tell it to make it tangent, and then down at the end right here, come along and make that coincident with the circle. And that can get you to the spot that you want on the circle. And now when I adjust that location, then the entire shape changes right in there. We didn't do that on the last one because it was just one previous step. We're going to go back and we can edit that up a little bit later on. So now it's time to parameterize our dimensions in here. So I'm just coming along and giving them some different names and remembering to add the occasional note so that I can figure out what these are supposed to do when I take a look at them. In a year's time or so. And there we go. Now we just come to our dimensions and those parameters that we just created. We can come in here and we can apply them to the drawing. Time for some parameters in the other dimension. And here we go. We'll create the parameters. And again, the reason we're creating the parameters and doing it this way is so that when we want to tweak things, we don't have to come all the way down to the sketch level and mess around with them. Sometimes when you come down to the sketch level and mess with things, you actually end up changing other things as well, which makes your drawing a little bit more complex. Remember, what we're doing right now is mostly draft work to try and get an idea for what dimensions might work and what shapes might work and how things might look, so that we can come back and have a nice version come together a little bit later on. Okay, there we go. That's the general shape. Let's do an extrude. Oops, missed a spot. There we go. Edit that up. And now we have the boom with that classic bend in it that you see in a lot of excavators. And we're going to tweak some of the dimensions right there. And there we go. That's looking about right. Okay, so it's going to be time now to joint this into our existing system. And so I'm just going to pick that surface right there and attach it right there. Make that a revolute joint so that can spin around. Next up, we're going to bring in the 30 milliliter syringe. So you are going to need a 30 milliliter syringe with the syringe cap on it and the syringe clamp or collar ready to go. We've covered how to do that in previous videos. And we'll come right in here and we'll connect that onto the arm at the end, and the other end is going to come up here and go to the boom. Now remember, we use a rigid joint in one of the joints and a cylindrical joint in the other, so that the rigid joint keeps it from sliding side to side, but we don't end up with dimensional conflicts if something's a little bit off on the other side. Okay, now in order to get things to move, we do have to play around with the grounding on here. So there we go. We've grounded the boom, and now we should be able to see that rotate back and forth about the boom, and you can get a sense for how that arm is going to move relative to the boom. You can come in here and play with some of the dimensions and try to make this work a little bit better. And there we go. We're just tweaking a few things there, trying to figure out which dimension I want to change. And of course, there's always an undo key if you change something and you don't like the way it is. You can also save regularly. Every time you save, Fusion creates a new version of it, so you can always go back to a previous version of your file. If you've got a sketch of what these dimensions are as you play around with them, it really helps you to keep that at the forefront of your mind. So like I say, I like to start out with a drawing as we go through. What I'm looking at here is, am I getting a full range of extension on that syringe? Am I using all of that 20 milliliter syringe that we just dropped right in there? I may have said 30 milliliter syringe earlier in the drawing. We're going to use the 30 milliliter in just a moment. The 20 milliliter has to be ready to go too. So you've got a 10 milliliter syringe out for operating the bucket linkage, and then a 20, and then we'll use a 30 in at the base. Now, in order to link to the base, we are going to have to create a base. And for right now, I'm just using a rectangle with a couple of circles in it. And we'll dimension everything in here, hole inside diameter, one of our parameters, so we can change that for different screw sizes if we need to. And there we go. We'll end up parameterizing those two dimensions as well. And I'm still here, just this is all stuff that you've seen before and you've done before, so it should be looking fairly familiar by now. And there we go. Okay, now we've created this new component called the base, and now we are going to apply a joint, and made sure it went up to the top level so everything was hooked together. That wasn't the joint that I wanted. There we go. Make sure the joint looks like the joint that you want. It's never good to accept a bad joint. And so that's sitting right in there. Now we do have to play around with well, we're going to bring the syringe in here first. I guess this is where the 30 milliliter syringe comes in. Where did I put my 30 milliliter syringe? I still need to put a cap and a clamp / collar onto this thing. So if you don't have one pre-assembled, it's nice if you've got it all pre-assembled, but if you don't, you can do your assembly right in here. Just drag your components in and joint them together. There we go. And I think I had to fidget around a little bit here to get this one to clamp in properly. There we go. I had to drag that a little bit just to get it to the position that I wanted. That's in there now. And now it's time to apply some joints. And this joint is going to come right there on the boom. You can see it rotating around. That was a revolute joint. And down here, I am going to make this a cylindrical joint. And there we go. That's all tucked away in there. Now, is this where I adjust the grounding? Because if I want my base to stay in one place, I have to make it the grounded option. And woo, something happened in there. I clicked on the wrong surface. You know, it's quite possible that you're going to run into problems putting your joints together too. You'll miss some little detail. And quite frankly, you've got to go back and take a look and say, how did that come together? And you have to play with it a few different ways. You know, that can get frustrating. And believe me when I say that this video has been through a few edits so that it makes it look like I'm getting it all right the first time. I did have to go out. I did have to change things. This is one of the places where I had to come in and change this. And right now, as I'm doing this, I'm like, why is this not behaving? I told it to go right here, and there we go. I just had to play with that joint and remake that joint so it is now in place. Now it was delivering me a few little warnings right in there, but now that seems to be working okay. And let's take a look right here. Oops, that's not grounded. This is where I come along and I unground the arm that was previously grounded and make sure I've got the base grounded. I had to turn on the object so that I could go in and, or the component, and turn it off at the component level. So there we go. Now we've got the base grounded. I've got I've got the boom and the arm actuating on there, and just trying to get a nice viewport for you there. Somehow I've put everything in at about 45 degrees. Doesn't really matter. There we go. Look at that. We're doing the dog paddle or something like that. So we know that the linkage down on the end of the arm is working. So that scoop is going to work for us. And there we go. Let's play with some parameters to see if we can get these dimensions to work out. If you've got a split screen, you might be able to drag this off to the other screen, but that really doesn't help when you're already using a split screen to watch me do some of this work. And again, I'm referring back to a piece of paper on my desk that has a little sketch of the drawing that I created so that I know roughly which dimensions I'm playing around with. And what I'm trying to do is get a nice range of movement on this arm. I want it to reach out and be able to dig deep. And right now, I don't think it's going as deep as I want. In a future video, we're going to take a look at how we actually build the profile of the pit that we're going to be digging into and make sure that we get this to the right size so that we can extract as much dirt from our pit as we can possibly get. We're also going to have to take a look at the forces that are working inside these syringes, because just because Fusion 360 lets you drag that joint around doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work in the real world. Oops, something got screwed up right in there and I just had to go and click undo to get back to where I was. So try a few different dimensions and stretching things out and seeing if I can make things a little bit longer. I think I could probably do a better job of setting up the dimensions in the boom. Maybe I could have had two hidden lines with an angle between them, and I could have controlled the bend angle and the distance along them. But as you can see, now we're starting to reach a little deeper down into the pit. But when we're all the way down right there, that arm is really going to have a torque issue. Anyway, there we go. If you've got that kind of movement, you're doing great.